There's about to be a whole lot of noise about how we're tackling the climate crisis and all the progress we're making. Tomorrow, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, will release the government's annual climate change statement, which is essentially an end-of-year scorecard on the government's climate action. Then Minister Bowen will fly off to Dubai for the United Nations Annual Climate Conference, COP28. Leaked documents have shown that the president of COP28, who also happens to be the chief executive of the UAE's national oil company, had plans to use the UN Climate Conference as an opportunity to strike deals on oil. Yeah, sure, which is totally cool. With Australia as the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter, and the Australian government trying to say that we actually need more fossil fuels to help address climate change, and an international climate conference hosted by an oil baron, let's just say there are a few question marks about integrity floating around in the climate policy space right now. Let's face it, whether it's here at home or at a global conference, when it comes to climate, it is just really hard to know if what we're being told by government and industry is the truth. There are 6 handy principles of climate integrity to help you wade through the jargon and decide for yourself whether what you're hearing will actually make a difference in tackling climate change. First, climate policy is actually really simple. That's not saying it's easy, but it is simple. The world must stop putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and do things that draw down emissions from the atmosphere. It's not one or the other, it's both. That means not approving new gas and coal projects. That means ending deforestation and native forest logging. That means not saying that new gas and coal projects are okay if some extra carbon is stored somewhere else by trees or soil. The government's signature climate policy, the safeguard mechanism, is deliberately elaborate and complicated, all to hide the fact that it does nothing to stop new gas and coal projects from going ahead, and it allows the fossil fuel industry to increase its emissions as long as it buys some carbon offsets. Second, government policies and targets must be based on science and act on what the science requires, not what personal or political preferences require. Any policy that does not address the primary cause of the climate crisis, fossil fuels, is not informed by science. Any policy that facilitates new fossil fuels is not a climate policy, it's greenwash. If a government anywhere tells you we need more gas and coal to meet our climate targets, they have no climate integrity. Third, to have integrity, climate policy must be independent. It should go without saying that independent experts should be writing our policies, not the industries affected by them. Yet Australia Institute research shows that the government agencies advising the government appear to be stacked with industry interests. Australia has a habit of creating climate legislation that somehow facilitates gas expansion, including a recent law that will allow Santos to say its gas projects are net zero because it will be dumping CO2 from its gas projects under the Timor Sea. Fourth, climate integrity requires transparency in decision-making and delivery. This should go without saying, but the Australian government is refusing to release a secret report on the threat climate change poses to Australia, as if we didn't know anyway. Secrecy and confidentiality should make way for public scrutiny and accountability. Fifth, we can't pretend markets are going to solve climate change when climate change itself has been caused by market failure. We need government leadership to set the standard required by the private sector. We didn't rely on the private sector to end whaling or asbestos mining or tobacco advertising in Australia. Yet the Australian government is saying Green Wall Street will address the climate and biodiversity crises. And finally, climate integrity requires being conservative. We all know prevention is better than cure. When we design bridges and cars, we err on the side of caution. Being conservative means doing as much as we can now to make the world safe, not as little as we can to claim that we tried. Science tells us we have one chance to avoid dangerous climate change, but Australian governments are opening whole new gas basins on the basis that some of their emissions will be offset or may be stored underground sometime in the future. When we try to interpret the outcome of COP28, or when we try and make sense of this year's climate statement, the lens of climate integrity is really important. It's easy to second guess yourself when you're untangling the jargon of net zero and spin, But the onus needs to be on the government and on industry to prove that their climate claims are legitimate. If we are to have any chance of keeping within the livable limits of climate change, we need real leadership by governments and climate policy that does what it says on the can. Specifically, we need a clear plan for the phase out of fossil fuels. Anything else is mere puffery.
Thanks for watching. If you like watching our videos or if you learned something new, let us know by leaving a like. And if you share this video on your social media or send it to a friend, that really helps us to get the message out. See you next time.